say you live with your family on a piece of land, and you're there, and your sibs were there, your mother and your father, your grandparents on both sides, and all your aunts and uncles lived on this chunk of land. And one day someone came along and says, this is not your land, it belongs to the government. What would you do? So that's what happened in Australia, starting back in 1770, when Captain Cook came ashore and to explore and somewhat conquer Australia. And he said, well, there's no elected officials, there's no written language, everything was done orally. And so he declared terra nullius, which means land that belongs to nobody, right? And so with that, the European settlers just basically went around the country and slowly acquired all the land in the name of the crown. And so this art exhibit is about one place where they did something very different using their art to get back their land. So there's a very famous academician who's an Aboriginal woman called Marcia Langdon, and she basically came out and said that terra nullius was a lie, and that wilderness was a lie, that there is no wilderness in Australia, but there are cultural landscapes. And a cultural landscape means that humans and nature exist in harmony for generations, right? They don't destroy, it's a net benefit. And I'd never really understood cultural landscapes, but we all know about World Heritage Sites, right? So in the world, there are 1,199 World Heritage Sites. And as I was preparing for this talk, I found out that there's a very much higher designation World Heritage Site that's called a cultural landscape. Instead of being 1,199, there's only 121 of those in the world. And guess what country has the most cultural landscapes?
Australia.
No, U.S.
France.
France.
Oh, because they're kings.
Actually, the cultural landscape in France that most well known is in Burgundy, where 1,000 years ago they organized their land in terraces to grow grapes and to manage them in a thoughtful way to have the reproducibility and irrigation and everything. So they create a cultural landscape, and that's what it really means. Australia has two cultural landscapes. One is Ulu Rock, and the other is another place on the coast. The United States has one cultural landscape. Any guesses?
Mesa Verde.
That's a World Heritage Site. So is Mesa Verde, but they're not cultural landscapes.
Washington, D.C.
It's a place called Papamohokoakea. And it is the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, 1,000 miles from Honolulu. It's now a national monument. It's also the site of Midway Island for the World War II battle, right? And I actually spent some time there working. And the cultural landscape there, that it was the meeting place when all the Polynesian migration, everything centered out of these cluster of islands, and that's where they ended up. And so there's a lot of archaeological sites in history that go back several thousand years. So these cultural landscapes are like pretty special, and they're pretty hard to acquire. Okay, so let's go back to, I need this piece of paper. So remember the people that lost their land, right? That the government took their land. This was a place called Big Sandy Desert, and it's a region out here. It's about 4 times the size of South Carolina. By the way, the Kimberley is a region here. It's the size of California. It has about 50,000 residents. The Pilbara is about the same size down here, but it has 35,000 residents. It's one of the least inhabited places on the planet, but very rich in a lot of ways. So the people in the Big Sandy Desert lost their land. They all moved into these communities, right, government-built communities. And in 1992, this guy from up in Arnhem Land sued the Australian government, said, this island is our island. His name is Mabo. and actually started 10 years earlier, and he tried to prove it. And ended up in 1992, they gave him title and his people to this island. So the people in 1993 in the Kimberley, particularly the Big Sandy Desert, which had 4 clans, petitioned the government to say, we want to claim our land to get it back. And the government said you have to answer 3 questions. Prove your culture, your law, and your traditional law. Prove where you came from and who you are. And prove where you walked on the land. Now this is desert. There's water holes, there's a few things. This is a group of people that have no written language. Everything is oral. And so for 4 years, they tried to figure out how are we going to prove it. And so these 4 clans got together and they said, well, why don't we paint what we know? And so the only thing we know that really defines who we are is how we survive in the desert, and that means water. So in the desert, they have springs, they're called jillas. And so what they decided to do was paint where they all grew up. So 40 people went out in the desert, 36 men and 4 women in 1997, and they painted a canvas that was 8 by 10 meters. Okay? And these represent all the different groups of people who live out in the desert. And that was the only thing they could think of doing. And so the government said, okay. The government came to the desert. They laid this out, and they went through a process where everyone who painted the section got up and told their story, where they came from, who they are, what their tradition was. 1997. And in 2007, they got their land back. They got title. 500 people got title, full title to over 84,000 square kilometers of land, which is basically the size of South Carolina. So these 500 people all own all this land now. And it happened all over Australia over time. They went back and made claims. But these people in particular, like I said, had no language, no written. In fact, their art didn't really start till the 1960s. So the canvas traveled the world, and there's another story that goes with that. So
That was their proof.
this is the only proof they had that they own the land. Yes.
Is that a picture from above down on
Yes.
huge land?
Yeah, because it's 8 by 10 meters.
But they got interrogated about what they painted. Did they also mark it out clearly on the part of the land they were on, or was it sort of more?
It was all sort of indirect. There's another story I'm going to get into and explain it, but basically all the people that painted, this is a brochure from the National Gallery, all the people that painted their sections to represent all the different clans. So, and they did this in 1997, and in 2007 they got that. And so the next part of the story even gets a little more interesting. So Andy, my cameraman of a long time, and I had been working on a documentary. And we were traveling around the country. We met this doctor through a friend. He was a pediatrician who worked for the Australian Health Service. And we wanted to go out and meet some of the artists and get out in the desert. So he told us we should go to this place called Fitzroy Crossing, which really is right on the edge of the desert. It's sitting out here. And we should go. And so Andy and I drive out there one day with our mate Simon, and John's there. We meet this woman. She's a Wamajari woman named Amy Nugget. And she's going to take us out in the desert. Now, Amy doesn't speak any English, so her daughter's there, okay? So we go around, and Amy's exhibited all over the world with her art. And so she's showing us this art, but she was doing a gallery show, I'm not sure where, and so all her art was in a big tube. And so I said, will you open the tube for us? And so the gallery owner opened them up, and actually this is a government-run organization. So they rolled it out, and this one painting stood out. It's this one. This is by a painting by a woman named Amy Nugget. I said, what is that? They said, this is Pulawawa. That's where I grew up. That's our permanent water hole. I said, what are these? She said, these are sand dunes.
The what?
Sand dunes. And they said, what's this? This is bush tucker. This is food and all these places to eat. So Andy and I sort of said, can we go there? She said, yes. So this place was 150 kilometers from this town, and we decided we'd go. We had our sleeping bags. And so Amy, her daughter, Annette, and their granddaughters, we all got in these trucks and drove out there and spent some time. What we didn't know was that, so we're in the gallery, and we're walking around. There's a giant carpet rolled up in the back of the room. And we said, what's that? And they said, oh, it's this. So Amy was one of the artists that painted this. And so she's going to take us out and show us the world. The other thing is, the woman who was the lawyer that filed the native title claim was her daughter, Annette. So all of a sudden, Andy and I were sitting with these people, and we didn't even know it when we went out with them. We were just like, they were really cool people, but we didn't know the story. So they took us out and explained the whole world. We went to the Jilla. When you go to Jilla, of course, you pay respects because the Jilla is where the snake lives. So you go out and you touch the water on you and say regard to the snake, and always the most elder person always goes first, right? And we went out, and this is Amy's picture from above. Now, she's never flown over the land, but this is how she sees it. The sand dunes are 30 feet high, and they're about a mile apart. And Andy would tell the story when Annette and her mom, Amy, were trying to decide how to get back to this Jilla. They said, we go over 17 sand dunes and then take a right. Because there's no track out there. So we ended up in this world where these people's art was all they had to document their existence, and it was how they got their land back. And so really sort of the inspiration for the art I've been doing is Amy's aerial artwork, right? And that the lines really represent where they're from. So in almost all these paintings, these photographs, you'll find lines, whether they're these fine curvy lines or straight lines. And if there's a straight line, you know humans made it, right? Let's see what else I want to do. Okay, let's see if I show. Now the last piece of this, just to explain the history, the Kimberley, this region is probably the oldest and largest art gallery in the world. And some of the sites have over 1 million pieces, and they cover like an area roughly the size of, twice the size of California. This artwork is dated 2 ways. This is in the cave on the Mitchell Plateau. We went, there's not a road within 100 miles of this place. The only way we get there is helicopter. And these are ochre, which is a iron pigment painting, and they paint on the rocks in these big caves. This is, this stuff's dated 20 to 30,000 years old. Some of the older rock art has been dated at 50,000 years. So this is, in terms of the Aboriginal perspective, they came first. They've always been here. They didn't migrate from any place. So the art exhibit is really about 2 things. It's a series of aerial photographs of the human footprint as well as nature. The color palette is all from this iron ore that brings out these incredible yellows and browns and reds, and then just the blue of the water. And then I decided to add one more piece of this. I put 12 storyboards up of on the back panel here. They all have QR codes, and they all link to either video clips of each of the people we met and worked with, or other stories about what we discovered in the area. So probably the most important thing about this thing for me personally is Andy and I were there in 2012, 2013. And when you do a long-term art project, it takes a long time. I mean, the first thing you do is I took like 15,000 pictures. So you go back and you get those pictures and you go through them and say, that's a nice picture, that's a bad picture, but there's so many, you're a little overwhelmed. And then, so the next phase is like, I wonder what I'm going to do with these pictures years later. And then the third thing is, I think I figured out what to do, and I probably have 1,000 hours of research and study into this, just trying to put together what this all means. And the most important thing about what I do is with documentary photography is you record things visually, but you're really trying to understand how this society and these people live and work and what their values are and how they thrive. And in the Kimberley, in the Pilbara, and probably all of Australia, their art is like what keeps the world moving. They don't work. Their art is what holds their connection to country. And in all their art, they hold true to their songlines, Dreamtime, and everything that's in that sort of mystic world. So a little bit about the prints. And there's two ways, there's a lot of ways to print something, but typically a lot of people print on paper. And paper is used using ink on the inkjet printer, and it sprays and puts out the marks, and it does very well with color. But these are dye sublimated metal prints. And the way that works is you take dye, you dissolve it in liquid, and through a special inkjet printer on special paper, it sprays the print onto the paper. And then the paper is put on top of a piece of metal under like 400-degree temperature and high pressure, and the dye sublimates, meaning it goes from a solid to a gas. And the gas permeates the surface of the metal and gives this level of color and detail. So,
Talk a little bit about the relationship between the art and your aerial photos, what the aerial photos mean and how they affect the art, the cave art. You want me to talk about it?
No, I didn't know if you had a specific point because we've talked so much. I've just...
Yeah, I think I drug my brother into this. But the photographs which you took from an airplane or helicopter represent what's happening on Earth and how man is changing the landscape in the Kimberley.
Mm-hmm.
And in this fragile environment, which has all of this incredible cave art, is being affected by all the natural resources of the Kimberley that mining interests are taking out. If you look at some of the photographs, you can see roads, you can see mines,
Mm-hmm.
you can see all of this. So this kind of this kind of unprotected environment that really has had no protection because they didn't have a written language. They didn't really have any records like white men would expect indigenous people to have. And then these outside forces are coming in and manipulating the ground.
We released a documentary film in 2015 called Keeping Country. And when we got there, it's very simple. We were there on a scientific expedition with some professors tracking marine mammals down the west coast of Australia. And so one day there's this town hall meeting, and I looked at Andy and says, let's go to this town hall meeting. We walked in, everyone's in there, and the place goes crazy. They're trying to build a $35 billion LNG plant right outside town on sacred land. And everyone says, no. And so we got dragged into why they were trying to protect it. And it really spawned this whole deal of making this film. So we made this film about protecting country, and we're actually part of filming this today. And if Andy asks you guys anything for a few questions, we're working on another film about just protecting the Kimberley because it's something we're pretty passionate about, and it's really important.
The pictures that they did on the landscape, how big did you say that was? I mean, how much did you have? How big is that whole thing?
This?
Is that like an acre, half an acre?
Oh, I'm sorry, which?
The one that's on the stand.
Oh, this picture is probably, this image is probably about this big.
But how big is the land?
photograph.
That's a cave.
It's a cave.
It's a cave.
That's in a cave.
This is a wall of a cave. Yeah, there's another scene in there. We went to like maybe a dozen different caves, and each clan has their own cave and their own art. There's a series of generations of that in terms of what kind of figures they draw. But like I said, this is probably the oldest rock art in the world that's been documented, and they're still doing inventory. So this is the cave wall. This is rock. This is just a rock surface. And these guys grind up this clay-bound, colored, it's got iron ore in it, and that's where you get the color scheme. And they draw these animals. Now, they also did petroglyphs as well, which is scratching into soft rock. And those are dated by using, measuring some kind of absorption of something from space. I don't really understand that, but there's a whole series of those as well. But these caves would be, we went to a cave probably as big as this room. There was a giant overhang, maybe, 30, 40 feet, and there was rock art just as far as everywhere. They do the fish, kangaroos, dugongs, which are like manatees.
So they were 30 or 40 feet above the ground.
Yeah, well, sometimes we would see them in the helicopter on the sides.
Did they build scaffolding or something to get up there, or it was just, or was
Oh, I don't know how they did it. But some of the places you'll see, they may have had, most of it's done within reach. But they're very narrow caves. But there's one, I'm in a cave on this pictures over here. I'm in a cyclone cave, which is where they go hide out when the cyclones come. And that one has a cyclone drawing on the ceiling, so you can see them. So one way to experience the show, and you don't have to do it all in the gallery, is to just, if you hit the QR codes, it'll take you to the website, and there's either a video clip or the background of the people, or it's really the deep dive into what really is going on there. So, yes?
I have two questions, and they might be related. You mentioned that one of the artists in the map had not seen their land from aerial position, and I'm assuming all of the artists have not, or all of the people.
They do interpret. They do interpret.
Seen it from the air.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it doesn't look this way. It's sort of looks, the lines are straight. The scale is different, but they do record. They do record where they live, and this is how they pass on. The only way they can pass on knowledge to the younger generation is through the art or through the oral stories.
So when, have any of the artists, do you have any experience with any, one of the members of this community experiencing the world from the air and what that was like for them?
They fly.
I don't know if Amy ever flew over where she grew up, but I suspect not. There's no airports where she lives.
No, right.
There's no commercial flights. It's hours,
Right.
hours and hours. No, they interpret their land.
Yeah, so my other question relates to that interpreting, and I'm just wondering how the Western eyes of the government were convinced to understand that, like, what that translation process was like, because that's kind of an extraordinary cultural leap to do.
I don't know about the European sort of Australian heritage and their sense of guilt, but right.
Okay.
But they clearly, I think when Mabo came through, and they had passed all this documentation. Like if you ever saw the movie with Kenneth about, they used to take half-breed children and try to take them and put them into these orphanages and try to, yeah. And jig along, right? And they tried to do everything to take away the Aboriginal way of life, right? They forced them out on their land and moved them into communities, where the government built the buildings. They're in total welfare, and for decades, maybe 100 years, they just were almost decimated. But when Mabo got this thing approved and they got their title back, Now they actually own the land. If you want to go in the Kimberley and you want to do something, if Andy and I wanted to go there and film, we have to go to the Aboriginal Corporation and ask permission.
And that includes mineral rights?
It does not. So it's an excellent question, right? But access still has to be negotiated with the Aboriginal Corporation. So there is, up there in Kimberley, there's the Kimberley Land Council that controls all access to all native title land. And if you want to do anything with those guys, then you have to go through them. And it's a communal structure.
Is that the only one of its kind in Australia? The only
No, they're everywhere. The model spread. But like I said, when Mabo got that passed, it basically gave a legal precedent to petition the government. And I don't know why it took them 10 years. I don't know why they took this piece of art and decided, because, like I said, some of those people did speak English, but they have no records of anything, right? There's no, and the oral histories, I doubt they could understand what those actually meant.
How did you become interested in Australia or these issues?
Oh, good question. So I've had an affiliation with a group I helped start it called the Ocean Foundation, which we started 20 years ago. I started a foundation called Marine Ventures with Brandon back in 2000. So we've been funding conservation projects. And we ended up getting involved outside the U.S. We spent a lot of time in South America, Tierra del Fuego. We did a bunch of projects. And so what we decided to do was, because we had worked with Andy, we were going in and making documentary films for what we thought really important conservation efforts. And we covered the cost. And we'd produce the film and they'd use it for fundraising, whatever, but it was a service. So we did a big project in Mexico over like 5 years where the Colorado River runs into the Sea of Cortez. Actually, it doesn't run because they stopped the water. We had worked with these guys at Duke, and the guys at Murdoch University in Perth were trying to develop a citizen science app so they could track all the whale migration and maybe stop all this oil and gas exploration. So we went there, Andy and I went, and we flew up the coast and met with people about the citizen science app. And then that's when we ran into this town hall meeting and they said, there's something else going on here. And if there's a good story, we'll chase it down. So we just started working on that. We had no idea. And I think if we made the film now, it'd be totally different because it was so complex. But once you get into these cultural landscapes, I mean, we all have a cultural landscape. We all live in our own cultural landscapes. And we would like them all to be harmonious, but the point is you have to really hold on to something that allows your world to exist, whether it's your community, your family, or anything. And these people lost everything, and they actually got it back. And the only way they get it back is really to paint. And that was the power of the art, to do that. So we've encountered these things, we've encountered the same situations a lot of different places. In Mexico, they took all the water, so all the people who fished, or all the Indian tribes of Cocopah, had no source of income, they had no fish, they ended up on welfare. And so some people arranged to buy water from the Navajo and open the dam and flood and bring the Delta back alive. So there's been a lot of efforts to fix what we broke. Okay, so yes?
With the rock art, how do generations show up? Like, do they paint on top of?
Ooh, good question. So you'll see on one of the little storyboards over here, there's a piece of rock art that has really bright ochre on it. So the elders are able to go back in and touch it up, as they say. But most of the stuff evidently the ochre on sandstone, there's something about it in the clay in it sticks forever, because these, we went through this cave for a whole day. I mean, no one had done anything to it, but it was very protected. It's also super dry. It's basically a desert. So,
It's amazing when you look at the art that Amy did, you wonder how would she come up with this expression of her landscape and it's so unique. It's not like any expression of any other landscape I've ever seen.
She tells in her thing, she said, we lived here, we moved water hole to water hole only on the full moon. And so we moved one because we didn't want to drink too much out of it.
Yeah.
So they basically moved and you crossed the sand dune.
The next one.
So this is just literal. It's not, there's no,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just how she lived. Now, Amy, by the way, just so you know, I don't know if I told you, Amy didn't see a white person until she was 13. She lived in the desert. There were no white people out there. There were no ranchers, nobody. So she came in during this terrible drought that forced them in, and the indigenous people were burning fires. I don't know how they started them. And they saw the smoke, and she says in the film, it says, they saw smoke, and someone said, there's still people in the desert. So Amy is from the world where nobody but her clan was there.
Is there climate changing? Are there, like, the precipitation or the drying?
Interesting that
Can you repeat the question?
I just was wondering.
is it climate change.
Yeah.
It has one of the highest incidents of cyclone or hurricane coming into that part, just because it's right up south of the equator. So when it rains, they get big storms, and otherwise it doesn't rain at all. So it's still super dry. They do in the record, for instance, there is a site that's up for World Heritage that has over 1 million rock art sites. And what they discovered was that during the last ice age, this place it's on a beach. In the last ice age, it was 100 kilometers from the ocean. So and in their art, they can actually document against the scientific record sea level rise and climate changes. So it's recorded in the rock art. Yeah, Ann.
What is the indigenous population of the Kimberley now?
Okay, so that's a good question. So there are 24 million people in Australia. 1.8 are of Aboriginal origin. In the Kimberley, there are 16,000 indigenous people on a land size of the state of California. And there's, I think, about 32 clans that each have their own dialect. And remember, these clans have been here for maybe 500 generations. You always marry into another clan, right? They don't intermarry. So everyone moves out of there, either the young man or the young woman moves to another clan. And you can see that in Coolabah, because he talks about, he's not from this land, but he's the only one left. So, and the big one right now is trying to use the art to preserve the historic culture. And what they're losing the most, what is really losing are these dialects, because no one is learning the new dialects, so, and no one's recording them.
Do the clans get along?
Oh yeah. In the Big Sandy, Amy talks about, they would all get together, but it'd have to be after a hurricane, because otherwise they would deplete the water of the water hole. Because these things, when you take out the water, they fill slowly. So yeah, there were times when they all got together, but it had to be after a major storm.
We're sorry, I'm late. How do these people get along? How do they make money, or how do they provide food for themselves?
I think, Larry, probably 40, 50 years ago, they were in full welfare. Just like in the government, to provide services, had moved them into these government-built communities, maybe 200-300 people. They always said that in Fitzroy Crossing, the land around Fitzroy Crossing was green, and it wasn't from grass, it was from beer cans, right? I mean, the diabetes, everything that has really troubled them. But when they got their land back, it took them a generation or two, and now if you look at what they're trying to do, they manage their country on their own with government's assistance. The art has become a major source of cultural experience and revenue for the communities. They do tourism, but even now they just are shutting down the vertical waterfall because at the request of the. So anyway, they're trying to become more independent.
Do they have public schools?
Yes.
Are the persons there asked to go to school, required to go to school? Do they
I
stay?
don't know. We worked with one of the people that really helped us get around was a pediatrician from Melbourne, and he worked for the Australian Health Service, and he would go for 3 months and just go, village to village. And so what he knew, Dr. John Bolton knew, he knew all the moms and the babies. And so that's why when he said, I can get you guys to meet these people, because he knew, right, if you take care of their children. So they have health care, they have schools, they have their own cultural events. Every community has a very large art resource where people come and paint.
Do they have a future? Is the expectation that 10 years from now, they'll still be able to get along and survive?
I actually think, like I said, there's this major tourist attraction in the Kimberley, and they're going to phase it out in 2 years because it's on what they consider sacred grounds, and the indigenous people really don't want all the tourists coming through anymore. So they're shutting it down. But see, these are only, as they call them, white fellas were making the money. Maybe they were getting spiffed a little bit. So they're trying to take full control of their country like they had before Cook got there in 1770. That's what they want to do. They want to go back and be able to manage with all the caveats of modern technology. And
But they weren't farmers, were they? 'Cause they didn't.
no, they live off bush tucker. They live off. Every season has its things, and as Kulaba says in the film, I could eat out here for the rest of my life.
So, the Inuits had a subsistence culture, but they didn't need money and they lived off the land, and then they bought snowmobiles and they needed gas, so they needed dollars. Has that same sort of thing happened to this group of indigenous people? They need
They're on full welfare. They're trying to build back their sense of community and back on their principles, and but it's like any place in the world. It's tourism, right? They have mines. They have one of the 5th largest diamond mines in the Kimberley in the world. They have oil and gas offshore. They've resisted to let the white fellas come in and provide jobs because they know they'll get screwed. They're actually fairly clever about it. So.
Can you talk more about the art that you did, these
Mhm.
plates? They're quite unique looking, and I just wanted to hear more about
We,
how you did it.
yeah, in 2008, Brandon and I were working on a project in Idaho, and they had these issues they couldn't solve, which was in this river, and they kept using these old techniques. And so Brandon and I said, why don't we just get up in an airplane and take pictures all during the year, and then you can look at it and see what changes and decide whether what you're doing is good, because they were like walking across the river like this, taking pictures. Anyway, we really pushed the technology. So we ended up doing aerial flights over a 70-mile stretch of river. And then to do it even better, there weren't any drones back then. So we got 6 weather balloons, filled them up with helium. We hacked a little camera, point and shoot camera, so it would take a picture every minute, and got 2 fishing rods tied to the balloons, and we put them up 1,000 feet, and our kids walked 7 miles down this river several times, and we took a picture every second. And then we had this whole continuous map of the whole place. So we've been taking pictures. In Mexico, we shot, I did the oil spill in New Orleans for a while after in summer of 2010. So we spent a lot of time in the air taking pictures.
So you use drones now?
These were 2012, 13. The distance, the challenge for us was this, was really distance. So, because we were doing some fairly long flights. So from Perth to Broome, that distance is the same distance as San Diego to Seattle. It's a 3-hour flight. We shot from Exmouth all the way up here north of Kununurra. That's over 1,000 miles. And drones wouldn't do it. So, and there's only one road that goes the whole way. So, mainly helicopter flights. That was most reliable. So we go places and then just use the helicopters to go do the surveys, and some airplanes, but it was just such a vast space. That was the only way to do it.
Did you get any support from the outside, or you sponsored this yourself?
Marine Ventures paid for this. Yeah.
So that nobody's ever done it before, what you've just done? You
I don't think so.
You know.
No, most of the stuff we do, no one's ever done before. It's the curse of. We're really good with technology. Andy's a really fantastic filmmaker, and we get up in the morning and he'd put on his harness and they'd take the door off the helicopter, and he wouldn't be wearing shoes, and he'd sit on the outside strapped in with his bare feet on the struts, and the guy would take off and just go. We might do. It's a real, yeah.
Have you changed the color, or like that
No.
orange and yellow?
No.
That's,
Okay, so these were taken with DSLRs, either a 5D Mark III, 24 megapixel, and a Sony RX1, or a Nikon D800 DSLR, 36 megapixel, all processed in Lightroom. So the only things I really do, these are the colors. These are the colors. This is the palette. So on this one, just if you're familiar with editing photographs, I pulled shadows up, I hit a little texture, a little contrast, and that's it. Sometimes I'd put a little dehaze on it and then pull up the blacks and the whites, but I don't mess with the color wheels or anything. So, and because I'm not good enough to do it. The colors are too bright for that. And even on these, the other thing we tended to fly, we were there in the summer, our summer, which is their winter, so it was 70 degrees. So it was cool. The helicopter's flight was, the air was very stable. There's not much wind in the cool season. So we just pop the doors off and shoot, probably 1,000 feet, thousandths of a second. We usually shoot primes if anyone's a photographer, so f1.8, because we have plenty of depth of field. So.
Is there anybody in the Central Australian government that's interested in what you're doing? Has anybody done it before, or they know that there's a need for it to be done?
Larry, I think that the material things that I think in the Pilbara and the Kimberley they're trying to do is for these sites to get World Heritage protection, because the indigenous people don't trust the government very well, and they know as we know even here, if the government changes, they can roll back or change something. So right now in the down around Karratha, there's a major World Heritage petition pending. And the government put $2 million 2 years ago into trying to identify sections up here for World Heritage. They think that's the only...
Does World Heritage bring money with it?
No, the only thing it does is bring tourism.
Okay.
Because that's what they'll sell.
And protection.
And they're happy.
And protection.
They're happy to have them come.
I
No, that's what I understood that you said.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how they. I think it's a necessary evil. I mean, anyone who's ever been in one of the western mountain towns knows what tourism is and what it does to real estate and.
but it might be protection against the mining?
There are a few mines there, but they reached an accord with Rio Tinto to not up on the Mitchell Plateau to not do a big mine because of the art sites and stuff. There's a big effort. It's just that there's typically about 12% of the Australian GDP comes from this one town. It's about $125 billion a year in iron ore sales. And then the oil and gas is about $60 billion a year. And then it's also one of the major uranium producers, nickel. It's big money. And just so you know, the mining thing didn't start till 1970. The other thing is, they didn't start painting in the villages till 1970. They never painted before that. Some teacher out around Alice Springs brought acrylic paints because they saw the old men were telling stories and drawing in the sand because they never had paint or paper. Yeah. So it's a, you know, this is like a giant, once you go in this hole, you may never come out of it because there's just so much going on here. It's, yeah. So any more questions? If not, I'll be, no, I'm happy to, if you guys want to ask me any questions, you know.
When I read stuff about Aborigines, like back in the 1970s and 80s, they always talked about totems and that each clan was responsible for a certain animal or certain part of land, and everything was sort of organized around that. Is that all gone?
No. In fact, when you're born, you're assigned a totem. A totem is whatever is the most prevalent food source. So I have a couple of paintings in my house called Bush Plum Dreaming, very, very large, from a place called Utopia, which is about right there. And these women were born during the bush plum harvest, and that's it. The men and the women have their own totems. They do separate ceremonies. They still do those. They're nice people. Other than the forces of modern society, they have coexisted for maybe 1,000 generations here and not screwed it up. They've actually lived in harmony, more than most of us have. So, okay, thanks everybody. Here. Thanks.